What happens when redrawing electoral boundaries quietly changes who gets represented? And why would a single administrative process reduce effective representation for millions without altering a single vote? In Assam, where more than 34% of the population is Muslim, the number of constituencies where that community can realistically elect candidates has reportedly dropped from around 35 to about 20 after a 2023 delimitation exercise. This video examines how that shift occurred, what mechanisms were used, and what it could mean for political representation in one of India's most sensitive regions. At stake is not just a state election scheduled for April 9th, but the structure of electoral competition itself. If the current changes consolidate, they could reshape candidate selection, party strategies, and voter influence for years. If they are reversed or challenged, they could trigger legal and political debates about fairness in constituency design. If they remain contested without resolution, they risk deepening mistrust between communities and institutions. The roots of this issue lie in the process known as delimitation, which involves redrawing constituency boundaries to reflect population changes. In India, this process is carried out by the Election Commission and is intended to ensure equal representation by adjusting for demographic shifts. However, the way boundaries are drawn can influence electoral outcomes without changing the underlying population. This is where the concept of gerrymandering becomes relevant, a practice historically associated with manipulating district lines to favor particular groups. Assam provides a complex backdrop for this process. The state has long experienced political tensions linked to migration, identity, and citizenship. During British colonial rule, large numbers of Bengali-speaking Hindus and Muslims migrated from East Bengal into Assam for agricultural and labor purposes. Over decades, this created demographic changes that became central to political mobilization. Movements in the late 20th century focused on identifying and removing undocumented migrants, shaping policies and public discourse. In recent years, political dynamics have shifted further. Under the leadership of Narendra Modi and Assam Chief Minister Himanta Biswa, the BJP has emphasized policies framed around protecting indigenous populations and redefining political representation. Opposition parties such as the Indian National Congress and the All India United Democratic Front have historically relied on Muslim voter bases in several constituencies. The 2023 delimitation exercise introduced significant changes. In Katigorah, a constituency in the Barak Valley region near the Bangladesh border, approximately 40,000 Hindu voters from neighboring areas were added to a voter base that previously stood at around 174,000 and was nearly evenly split between Hindus and Muslims. This adjustment shifted the constituency into a clear Hindu majority. As a result, major political parties have now fielded Hindu candidates, reflecting the new electoral arithmetic. Similar patterns have been reported across the state's 126 constituencies. In the Barak Valley, which has a population of over 1.7 million Bengali-speaking Muslims, the number of legislative seats decreased from 15 to 13. Constituencies like Algapur and Katlachera saw segments of their populations reassigned, while Hailakandi absorbed additional Hindu-majority areas, altering its demographic balance. In Neoboika, previously a constituency that elected Muslim representatives multiple times, Muslim-majority areas were divided across 4 neighboring constituencies, reducing their collective electoral influence. Analysts such as Yogendra Yadav have described these changes using terms like cracking, packing, and stacking. In practical terms, cracking involves dispersing a concentrated voting group across multiple constituencies to dilute its influence. Packing consolidates a group into fewer constituencies, limiting the number of seats it can win. Stacking combines smaller populations from another group to create a new majority. Critics argue that these techniques have been applied in Assam to reduce the number of constituencies where Muslim voters can decisively influence outcomes. Government representatives and party officials have rejected these claims. BJP spokesperson Kishore Kumar has stated that the delimitation process was conducted by the Election Commission and was not driven by communal considerations. The Election Commission's own guidelines emphasize geographic continuity, administrative convenience, and natural boundaries, such as rivers and forests. However, some local political figures have argued that these principles were not consistently followed, citing cases where areas separated by significant geographic features were merged into single constituencies. Recent developments have intensified the debate. Public remarks by political figures, including statements by Assam Cabinet Minister John Amala during campaign events, have been interpreted by critics as acknowledging strategic intent behind the boundary changes. At the same time, voter experiences reflect growing uncertainty. Two potential scenarios illustrate the stakes. In the first scenario, the new constituency boundaries remain unchanged and are normalized over multiple election cycles. Political parties would adapt by selecting candidates aligned with the new demographics, potentially reducing minority representation in legislative bodies. This could stabilize electoral outcomes but alter the diversity of representation. In the second scenario, legal challenges or political pressure lead to revisions or increased scrutiny of the delimitation process. This could result in boundary adjustments or new guidelines to ensure proportional representation. However, it could also create prolonged uncertainty, with elections contested not only on policy, but on the legitimacy of the electoral map itself. The implications extend beyond Assam. As one of India's most demographically complex states, Assam is often viewed as a testing ground for broader political strategies. If similar approaches are applied elsewhere, they could influence how electoral boundaries are drawn in other regions with diverse populations. This raises questions about the balance between administrative necessity and political neutrality in democratic systems. At a global level, the issue connects to wider debates about representation and fairness in electoral systems. While the mechanisms differ across countries, the underlying challenge remains consistent: how to ensure that boundary changes reflect population realities without distorting political voice. As Assam approaches its election, the focus will not only be on which party wins, but on how the rules of competition have evolved. The outcome will provide insight into whether demographic engineering through delimitation can redefine political landscapes without formal changes to voting rights. In the end, this situation highlights a fundamental tension within democratic systems. Representation depends not only on who votes, but on how those votes are counted and organized. Stability requires trust in that structure, while conflict emerges when that trust is questioned. What happens next in Assam will depend on whether institutions, political actors, and voters converge on a shared understanding of fairness or continue to operate within competing interpretations of it.